This is the Vietnamese billionaire Truong My Lan. In 2024, she was sentenced to death for embezzling $12 billion in loans from the Saigon Commercial Bank. 13 years earlier, Truong My Lan arranged the merger of three smaller banks to form Saigon Commercial. She then ordered hundreds of loans, amounting to $44 billion, to a network of shell companies under her control. According to the prosecutors, $27 billion was misappropriated, while $12 billion was embezzled. Her loans accounted for 93% of all the bank's lending. This vastly exceeds Vietnam's legal limit, which prohibits any individual from holding more than 5% of a bank's shares. Her death sentence has since been converted to life imprisonment. But some reports suggest this alleged fraud wasn't exactly a well-kept secret. Which leads us to this question: how and why did it go on for so long? According to the Global Organized Crime Index, financial crime is a prevalent issue across the Mekong region. In ascending order, Vietnam scored 7 out of 10, Cambodia, Laos, and Thailand scored 8 out of 10, and Myanmar scored 8.5 out of 10. This placed Myanmar, my home country, 7th out of all the countries worldwide. Since the COVID-19 pandemic, the Mekong countries have seen a sharp rise in cyber scams. Abandoned casinos, hotels, and resorts were repurposed into so-called cyber scam compounds, serving as bases for romance scams, investment and impersonation scams, Ponzi schemes, voice-phishing operations, and more. These schemes have tricked thousands of people to transfer money into mule accounts. But as the case of Truong My Lan illustrates, financial crimes go far beyond cyber scams. Financial crime refers to fraud, tax evasion, embezzlement, and the misuse of funds, but not money laundering or bribery. So what do these crimes have in common, and what makes financial crime in the region so prevalent? I am joined by BC Tan, Managing Director and Head of Southeast Asia at Kroll, a leading provider of financial risk and advisory solutions. He specializes in the use of technology and data science to address anti-money laundering, counter-financing of terrorism, transnational organized crime, and global sanctions risks. BC, welcome to the Index. Now, first off, could you give us an overview of financial crimes in the Mekong region and how entrenched is this type of crime there?
So I think in the recent years, there's been quite a lot of adverse attention on the Mekong region, specifically around scam compounds and scam operations. It's obviously a problem that we're all very concerned about. However, it's also important to note the context of how that ecosystem is prevailing. So there's a lot of both licensed and unlicensed casinos that have been operating in that region for quite a while. There's also on the backdrop that a history of narcotics trafficking in certain parts of that region. Also, in the Mekong region, the countries in the Mekong region, for most parts, they're not excused from global financial regulatory frameworks. So all countries in the world, or not all, but most countries in the world are subject to those regulations. Now, using the Financial Action Task Force as sort of the benchmark, Myanmar, unfortunately, is still on the high-risk jurisdiction lists. Thailand is a member of the Asian Pacific Money Laundering Group, which is a member of Financial Action Task Force. They were removed from the jurisdiction under increased monitoring in 2013. Cambodia was removed in 2023. Both Laos and Vietnam are still under that group of the gray list, as we call it colloquially, but jurisdictions that require increased monitoring. Money laundering and financial crimes very, very rarely are isolated in one jurisdiction. They depend very much on the global financial system, which, money flows freely across the world. And the methods in which you launder money or move the illicit assets across the world are at times very, very similar. So the misuse of legal persons, i.e. using shell companies, they're very much used in trying to conceal embezzled money. I mean, one of the cases in Vietnam that you mentioned, again, that was how the embezzlement essentially occurred from the starting point. You create shell company or fictitious company, you exert influence internally, because you are a person of influence, and you force the bank to extend bad loans to shell companies, which you then ultimately are the beneficial owner. The use of shell companies are again used in arms trafficking, all types of illegal activity.
Now let's talk about, I guess, just the financial crimes, this umbrella of financial crimes, because there's quite a lot under there, right? You've got the tax avoidance and evasion, you've got embezzlement, you've got misuse of funds, you've got fraud. Who's behind those crimes, and who are the victims? Who are they targeting?
That's a tough question. I mean, there's so many different types of criminal typologies. I mean, the Mekong region, we're talking about illicit fund flows. We're talking about the source criminal typologies being, again, drug trafficking, human trafficking, illegal wildlife trade, and more recently, the cybercrime fraud and scams, right? And then also the casinos and the online gambling platforms that operate in those ecosystems have also become hubs for illicit fund flows and money laundering. So I mean, that's an important point that I really want to start with. Now, if we focus on the scam portion for now, it's a little bit complex because there's a few angles here. The scam victims are rural, right? And we like to believe that they seem to be predominantly from developed countries. The statistics actually suggest otherwise. If we use the global anti-scam alliance numbers from November last year, we're looking at a global estimated loss of about $1 trillion in the preceding 12 months. I wouldn't take those numbers as absolute fact, because we know a lot of victims do not report. Right? Now, if we compare that, if we measure that in terms of GDP, the developing countries are the ones that are most hit, indicating there's much higher volumes of victims from developing countries. Thailand, Vietnam, ironically, within that region, and from a global perspective, they feature top 10 lists, right? In the top 10 list of countries most impacted by measuring by GDP in terms of losses to fraud and scams. And along that top 10 list, you have other Asian countries, you have Africa, you have Brazil. So really the target impact is global. From the human trafficking victims that we understand being trafficked into these scamming compounds, again, while we're seeing certain patterns in terms of the source countries, it is fairly globally represented. So we're seeing victims, obviously, from Asia, South Asia, Africa, and in smaller numbers, really representing many parts of the world. I guess the point I'm trying to make is it's truly a global problem. Now, who are the actors who are managing these compounds, managing the scam operations? I think not enough work is being done on that front. I'm not saying the other work in victim support on both the scamming and human trafficking side is less important. It's equally important, but I do feel that we do need to invest time and effort and focus in truly identifying who the traffickers are, the people who are operating these scamming operations, the investors who have invested in the scamming compounds and the scamming operations. I mean, I obviously have a view of some of them, but I just feel that we certainly need more focused work on that front.
That's really interesting. And we will come back to the scam centers later in the conversation. But I now want to sort of ask you about the role of state and state embedded actors in allowing financial crimes to happen in this region. What would you say their role is?
Yeah, a big role, sadly, unfortunately. I mean, crime political nexus is a real thing. I mean, not to bore you with ancient history, but the whole global anti-money laundering regime, and I guess to a big part how even the Financial Action Task Force was set up, large-scale corruption, kleptocracy was indeed a big driver for us globally to put together, these types of standards and control frameworks around financial crime. So it's definitely at the heart of it. The crime political nexus is a genuine problem, not just in the Mekong region, all over the world, but you do see it more pronounced in developing countries. The transnational criminals with a large, deep pockets of criminal capital, they have indeed been able to influence, individuals in government, individuals with political influence. And that's something that we've noticed. And the real concern here is, again, back to the statistics, we're looking at $1 trillion of losses to scams. That's a lot of money. That's very, very, very deep pockets. And I do genuinely feel that we're at a tipping point where the criminal assets and ability to influence is at a tipping point. And we are at a tipping point where the criminal capital available can start to hijack states, which is a really worrying trend for me.
Now, earlier on, when we were talking about scam centers, you talked about how they started sort of developing in areas where the casinos used to be as well. That sounds quite interesting. And I want to hear more because, in 2021, the Global Initiative sort of reported on an increase in the number of casinos in the Mekong region since 2014. So maybe you could explain a little bit about whether these establishments, how and whether these establishments are linked to financial crimes as well.
Yeah, I mean, but funny point. I mean, I know my parents told me this when I was young, and it sort of stuck with me. And they always said that the best food you get in any Asian city is in the red light district, because you have the crowd, you have the population, so naturally, good food and everything else that comes along. And I'm trying to introduce that thought to explain that the casinos themselves alone are, it's not just the casinos. The point here is that with casinos coming into a certain area or jurisdiction, what it actually creates is an ecosystem. Right? It's an ecosystem that is funded by a huge amount of cash influx from the gamblers, right? And with the casinos, again, just like red light district, you assume that you will get good food. But the cash-intensive environment, what comes along with it will be definitely much, much better technology infrastructure. So technology, the internet and IT connectivity infrastructure, mobile connectivity infrastructure, that's definitely all included. Builders, developers, all that comes in, better roads, better access. And they've created an effective ecosystem where other players can come and benefit from that infrastructure. Now, unfortunately, for most cases, the people who bandwagon on these infrastructures are unfortunately not legitimate businesses. They would be parallel, unlicensed casinos, which happens a lot. Private gambling rooms, again, unlicensed and unregulated. Online betting platforms, which again are unregulated but have global connectivity. So that's obviously the issues. Loans, credits, junkets, and then things like sexual services, drugs, and so forth. And to some level, we argue that ecosystem, that created ecosystem, is when the scam operators then came in and say, oh, this is a fantastic environment and infrastructure that I would benefit from and operate from these places. So sadly, that's my take. It's really the ecosystem that's empowering these illicit markets.
Thanks so much, BC. I mean, it just sounds like, financial crimes are the engine that sort of fuel, the other type of organized crimes as well. So what can we do to sort of respond better to these financial crimes?
First and foremost, I'm very, very sympathetic to law enforcement agencies around the world. I'm sympathetic because genuinely, I feel that they're fighting this battle with one hand tied to the back. Law enforcement in its construct, the legal system in a sovereign construct, again, is not designed, or is not. It's designed to react poorly to cross-border crimes, and I think our conversation thus far, the key theme is it's global, right? It affects all of us. It's, everyone in the world is in some way or another touched or complicit to this ecosystem. So I do sympathize with the challenges that the law enforcement are facing in pursuing these cross-border crimes. The second part is there's a cost to compliance. There's a cost to enforcement. And looking again at GDP and budgets of Mekong countries compared to the rest of the world, their law enforcement budgets, the capacity, it's minuscule compared to the developing world. So to a large extent, we're also passing that cost to the developing world, something that we need to be cognizant of. So again, to your question, so what can we do to enhance the response? I think we should genuinely look at how we can better support law enforcement and frontliners in the Mekong region. It could be in the form of contributing to their budget, but certainly capacity building, teaching them the ways of how do we address these criminal systems, how do you derive intelligence, how do you conduct forensic investigations, and the tools that go along with it. So support is definitely one. Intelligence sharing. So it's intelligence sharing within jurisdiction. So having different agencies work together. That's one. Intelligence sharing between multiple jurisdictions. Again, it's a cross-border issue, right? We're tracing a criminal, we're tracing fund flows across multiple jurisdictions. How can we quickly and effectively share intelligence to the benefit of identifying, stopping illicit funds, protecting and compensating victims? The third one is intelligence sharing between government, which is the public sector, with the private sector. Right now I'm seeing a lot of traction on intelligence sharing between financial institutions and law enforcement. I'm seeing more traction on intelligence sharing between social media platforms and law enforcement agencies. I would very, very much like to see that extend to NGOs who are working very much on the front line with victims on the ground, also being able to work closely with the financial institutions, with the social media platforms, and then obviously overarching with international law enforcement agencies around the world. Better share intelligence, better construct these intelligence briefs, and better understanding, again, to the first question, who are the actors? Who are the people operating, investing into these scam operations?
Thank you for joining us for this episode of The Index, and a special thank you to BC Tan. Remember that the Global Organized Crime Index is a totally free resource and is available to everyone. If you'd like to learn more, head over to the website at ocindex.net.